Chapter 10. Abby blew a wisp of hair out of her face. She was glaring at Zoran, and he was glaring at her. They had been at the staring contest for the past 30 minutes, ever since Abby told Zoran she was going away for a day, possibly 2. "Zoran, I have to go. I have a contract. My clients have already paid me a great deal of money. I'll be back as soon as I can, but I have to go. I have no choice." Zoran ran both of his hands through his long hair. Knee. He would not let her out of his sight. What if something happened to her? What if she didn't come back? It was too much. He couldn't let her go. He growled in frustration. How could he explain that he and his dragon could not be away from her, not even for a few hours? Well, maybe for a few hours, but damn it, he didn't want to be away from her. He glared at her. Why did she have to be so stubborn? What did it matter if she didn't go? She wasn't going to be on this planet much longer anyway if he had his way, and he planned on having it. He had never been so frustrated at not being able to communicate in his life. He had known her a total of 3 days, 5 if he counted the time he was unconscious, which he didn't, and he had never been more frustrated in his life. He paced back and forth before grabbing Abby and pulling her out the door. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to get his brothers to help him. Abby struggled to keep up with Zoran. She knew he was frustrated, but so was she. She had never had sex until yesterday morning, and they'd made up for all the years since she hit puberty in one night. She was still a little sore, though the symbiot seemed determined to help her overcome that. She had never been as embarrassed as when she caught one of the little gold devils moving around her private parts this morning. When she screamed, she had to put up with Zoran laughing at her as she tried to get the thing to move back to her wrist. Zoran then proceeded to make love to her over and over, just so he could hold her down and watch as his symbiot healed her. It wouldn't have been so bad, but it seemed the more they did it, the more she wanted it. She was becoming addicted to sex. As they approached the meadow, Abby pulled back. She had touched and caressed the golden ship, but she had never been inside it. She didn't know what she expected, but she wasn't sure she wanted to be inside anything that was alive. Zoran threw her a frustrated look before turning and picking her up into his arms. Abby just pressed her lips together. He wasn't the only one frustrated. The only time they seemed to really understand each other was when they were in bed, and then all they did was grunt, groan, moan, and scream. A very universal language, Abby decided. Zoran sat down in a chair, turned, and gave a command. Suddenly, a view screen appeared with several males on the other side. Abby couldn't help but be fascinated as she sat up in Zoran's lap. They were all tall, dark, and handsome. Zoran spoke rapidly to the man on the screen, who turned and spoke to another man before turning back to stare at Abby. "Wow, this makes the Chippendales look like Boy Scouts," Abby said, breathing shallowly as she stared at the men who were staring at her with the same look of astonishment. "Who is Chippendale?" Zoran asked. Exotic male dancers. I saw them at a club in New York that one of my clients took me to once," Abby replied absent-mindedly, more focused on the view screen. It took a minute for her to realize she actually understood Zoran. Abby turned in his lap, her face lighting up. "I understood you!" She threw her arms around his neck, laughing as she pressed little kisses all over his mouth. Zoran, who is the female, and is she taken?" Keelan asked from the bridge of his ship. Keelan was stunned to hear from Zoran again so soon. He was even more astonished at his request for an open translator to be patched into their comm. When he saw the female, he felt a deep reaction to her. She was truly beautiful. That she was sitting on his brother's lap had been a surprise. That she was beautiful had not. His brother had a way of attracting beautiful women wherever he went. Abby giggled. "Are you offering?" she teased back. She was almost giddy at finally being able to understand Zoran. Zoran growled deeply. "Yes, she is taken. She is my mate, and no," he said to Abby, "he is not offering." Zoran pulled Abby into his arms possessively. Abby laughed, pressing a kiss to his neck. "How did you do this? I can understand you. Is it only when we're here?" Zoran ran his hand down Abby's arm possessively. "Yes, soon you will be able to understand me. My brother should be here day after tomorrow. They will bring you a translator." Abby pulled away, looking at Zoran in dismay. "The day after tomorrow?" she said in horror. She only had today left to be with him. She was leaving for New York tomorrow morning and probably wouldn't be able to be back before he left. Abby tried to pull away from Zoran. She didn't want to see the look of pity she knew must be on the faces of the men on the spaceship. She was sure she looked like a lovesick puppy dog. "Yes, this is why you cannot leave," Zoran said, pulling her against him. "I have to go. My client is sending a plane for me in the morning. I told you that. Edna will be back today to get Bo and Gloria. I leave tomorrow, and if I'm lucky, I can get a flight back and be home late tomorrow night, or early Sunday," Abby said, feeling sick to her stomach. She was not ready to say goodbye to him. "You don't have to leave so soon, do you? Couldn't you wait a few more days?" Abby asked desperately. Glancing at the man standing on the view screen, she turned back to Zoran. "I mean, it's not like they haven't traveled a gazillion light years for you. What could a couple more days make?" Zoran's eyes grew dark as he tried to hold his temper. "Abby, you do not understand. You are my mate. I forbid you to go." "You forbid?" Abby looked at Zoran in amazement. "Who died and made you king? I'll go if I want to. I made this commitment before I met you, and I plan on honoring it. I keep my promises and commitments." "What about your commitment to me?" Zoran said, furious. "And my father died and made me king." "Commitment? We never made a commitment to each other. I knew you wouldn't be here for very long, but I thought I would have at least a few more days to be with you before you left. I understand you want to return to your home. I would, if I was in your place." "And what do you mean your dad died and made you king?" Abby responded hotly. "We did make a commitment. I marked you. My dragon marked you. My symbiot claimed you as my true mate," Zoran said through gritted teeth. "My father was king of the Valdier, and now I am. I didn't know what that meant, so it doesn't count. I can't have a long-distance relationship with you. How is that going to work with you God knows where and me here on my mountain? I really don't think my cell phone plan covers those types of calls." "And what do you mean you're a king?" Abby asked, confused. A light cough came from behind them, and they turned in unison to look at the man staring back and forth between the two of them in a combination of amusement and confusion. "Zoran, haven't you been able to communicate with your—" "I'm afraid I did not get your name, my lady," Keelan asked. "Oh, dear, I'm so sorry. My name is Abigail Tanner, but everyone calls me Abby. It's a pleasure to meet you," Abby said, pushing a strand of hair out of her eyes as she looked shyly at Keelan. "Keelan, my lady. Zoran's younger brother by 3 years," Keelan replied, enchanted by the beautiful, strong, stubborn female sitting on his brother's lap. He never thought to see a female who could stand up to his brother, especially when he was angry. Abby smiled, showing off her dimples. Zoran groaned. He was powerless when Abby smiled with her dimples. He knew his brother would be a total pushover. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Keelan. I'll be happy to welcome you to my home when you arrive," Abby said softly. Keelan stared at the delicate beauty. It will indeed be a pleasure to meet you, Lady Abby, and I look forward to enjoying your hospitality. Abby turned to look at Zoran. See, he doesn't mind if you have to stay an extra day. Please say you will, Zoran. I promised, and I could never live with myself if I didn't keep it. Abby gave Zoran her sad puppy dog eyes and pushed her lower lip out just a little. It always worked with her grandfather. Abby heard Keelan groan. Zoran, let her finish her duty. We will wait for her return. Zoran moaned. He had a feeling he was better off when she couldn't understand him. He seemed to get his way more. Zoran growled again as he listened to Abby talk to Keelan, then Trelan, then half a dozen other men on his brother's crew who came to see the lovely alien female who wore the dragon's mark on her neck. Abby was still unaware of it. When they finally made it into the bathroom this morning, they were more interested in each other. By the time they got out of the shower, the mirror was fogged to the point neither of them could see a reflection. Zoran was too distracted to explain to Abby what had happened. Every time he got close to her, he couldn't seem to keep his hands and mouth off her. They even made love on the path up to his ship. Abby was so beautiful, bent over the limb of a branch with him mounting her from behind. Bo quickly lost interest and took off for the meadow without them. By the time they got to the meadow, he took her again, this time on the soft grass. It seemed his dragon was making up for lost time. Trelan gave him the idea of using his symbiot to make a connection with his ship, which would have an open line to their translator. The symbiot on Abby would allow her to understand what Zoran was saying. It was a roundabout way for them to communicate, but it was better than nothing. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking about a little bit of everything. Abby discovered that Zoran and his brothers often got into trouble when they were younger for all types of misadventures. His mother was still alive and doing well, though she preferred to spend most of her time at their mountain home away from the city. Zoran did not really have a favorite color because he had never really thought about it, while Abby loved blue and green. He was a definite meat eater and could not understand why Abby did not eat meat at all. They ended up having a heated discussion on that. Abby was determined to enjoy being with Zoran to the fullest. She didn't want to think about his leaving in just a few days. She knew she loved him. She also knew she would never love another man. Picking up her grandfather's guitar, she sat on the swing watching as Zoran played with Bo. It was funny watching him. She could almost picture him playing with their children, a dog of their own running around, while she sat on the porch swing watching them. Tears burned her eyes at the dream that would never come true. Strumming the strings, she began playing and singing some of the country songs her grandmother had written. She loved playing and singing. It helped her, especially when she was feeling so emotional. Zoran threw the green tennis ball for Bo before turning to watch Abby. She was wearing a tank top and a pair of jeans. She left her hair down after the last time he stole her hairband, and it fell in waves around her. She had kicked off her shoes and sat with one leg tucked under her as she used the toes of her other foot to gently push the swing back and forth. She had reached over a few minutes before and picked up an odd-shaped instrument which she was absently strumming on. Now she began playing a beautiful song about a young girl who was in love. Her husky voice echoed over the mountain. Zoran thought it was the most beautiful sight he had ever seen or heard before. Abby seemed totally unaware of how captivating she was. Love for her swelled through him to the point of pain. He not only desired her physically, but he desired being around her, listening to her, watching her as she did little things, like making them a meal or talking to the animals, stroking and petting them to offer them love and comfort. Her gentleness wrapped itself around his heart. Zoran walked slowly toward the porch where Abby sat playing and singing. She smiled as he came up the steps. Bo followed him, panting, before dropping the ball and lying down next to him. My grandparents and I used to sit on the porch every night the weather allowed. We'd sing and play together for hours. If it was cold, we would sit in the living room in front of the fireplace and sing. My grandparents and my mother are buried on this mountain. I knew I would never leave it. This is my home, where I was always meant to be. Abby smiled sadly at Zoran. There are mountains where I come from. They are just as beautiful as these, Zoran replied softly, his gold eyes darkening with emotion. I would like to show you the mountains of my home. Abby shook her head, fighting back tears. Tell me about them, she said huskily. Let me see them through your eyes. Close your eyes, Zoran said, moving to sit next to Abby. He reached over, pulling her onto his lap, his arms tightly wrapped around her. I want to show you them the way I see them. Abby lay back against Zoran, enjoying the feel of his strong arms. Closing her eyes, she relaxed as he began telling her about his home, his mountains. During the early morning, a dense fog covers the lower mountains. The trees on our mountains are much larger than the ones you have here. Some of the branches are as big around as the trunks of your trees. They have to be to support the weight of the dragons who love to fly through them, Zoran began. Abby gasped as the symbiot around her neck wove with the one around his. The warm gold bands intertwined together, sending her pictures of what Zoran was describing. She watched as he shifted to his full dragon form, a powerful green, gold, and red dragon. He wasn't massive like the dragons from the movies. He was the same height as he was now if she didn't count his tail and wings. She saw his gold symbiote form armor over his body, a gold breastplate, head armor, and armor for his claws, wings, and tail. She watched as his powerful wings swept up and down, lifting him straight up into the air in a matter of seconds. She turned her head. It was as if she could almost feel the wind blowing across her face as he flew through the thick fog, swerving in and out between the huge branches of the trees before breaking through the cloud cover to soar over the mountain ridges. Abby set the guitar down without opening her eyes so she could spread her arms out, as if she was the one flying. Zoran's voice rolled over her, through her, as if they had become one and the same. She felt the freedom and power of the dragon in flight. She laughed as she felt the spray from the waterfall as he dove, swirling in and out of the rainbow-colored mist. She looked at his reflection as he skimmed the water. His back claws drew faint ripples as they barely touched the surface before sweeping back up. She could feel his love for his home and the freedom of being who he was in those few precious minutes. Her breath caught in her throat as she felt him landing on one of those thick branches so he could look down upon the world he called home. It was incredibly beautiful. The sound of a truck coming up the drive and Bo barking drew them out of the world they had escaped to. As the gold around their necks separated, they gazed at each other, unable to bear ending the journey they had just traveled together. Zoran leaned forward and brushed his lips gently across Abby's lips. The sound of a truck door slamming finally broke through Abby's daze. Turning to look at their visitor, a smile broke through at the sight of Edna's worried look. Abby pulled herself reluctantly out of Zoran's arms and off his lap to stand up. "Welcome home, Edna," Abby said, smiling at her old friend. "Hello, dear. I hope I'm not interrupting anything," Edna said with a small smile and a knowing look. "Zoran, I'd like you to meet an old family friend. Edna knew my grandparents when they lived in Los Angeles and has known me my whole life. She's my godmother," Abby said, walking forward to wrap her arm around Edna's waist. "Edna, this is Zoran. He needed a place to stay for a few days." Edna frowned. "Just for a few?" She looked back and forth between Abby and Zoran. Abby blushed, unable to meet Edna's knowing look. Zoran immediately liked the older woman. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Lady Edna," Zoran said. Edna frowned. "What did he just say? The only thing I halfway understood was my name." "He said it was a pleasure to meet you. Zoran isn't from around here," Abby said, pushing her hair behind her ear as she looked nervously at Zoran. She had never, ever lied to Edna and knew she could trust her with her life, but she wasn't sure she could trust her with Zoran's. "Where are you from, young man?" Edna asked in her usual point-blank, I want a straight answer right now voice. Zoran looked amused. He could tell Edna was very protective of Abby, and he appreciated that. He also thought it was funny. She called him a young man, while he did not know the age limit of Abby's species. His could live for thousands of years. His father had perished in a tragic accident during a hunt. Even so, he was over 1,000 years old. His mother would have perished as well if she had been his father's true mate, but his symbiot or his dragon never fully accepted her. They had still reproduced, but that was mostly because his mother came from a long and distinguished line of dragons. Theirs was a union of two strong clans bound together to form one strong one. "A very distant land," Zoran replied, looking directly into Edna's eyes. "He's from a very long way away, Edna. Would you like some coffee or tea? I also need to show you the piece I finished. I'm flying out tomorrow morning to New York to deliver it. Can you believe they're sending their private jet for me?" Abby said, moving up the steps, giving Zoran a warning look as she passed him. Edna chuckled. "I'd better skip tonight. I love my kids, but damn if they don't tire me out. I want to see this piece you've been hiding from me and get Gloria and Bo back home before it gets dark if I can." Abby chuckled as she slipped her shoes on. The three of them walked down to Abby's workshop. Edna was impressed with Abby's latest masterpiece. Edna told Zoran about how proud she was of Abby and how special she was. Zoran just grinned as he watched Abby blushing and trying to get Edna to hush up. Zoran was unable to stop himself from grabbing Abby during one of her blushes and kissing her, deeply, right in front of Edna, who stood there, grinning. "Zoran," Abby protested huskily. She could feel the fire burning inside her. Whenever he touched her, she seemed to ignite into flames. Edna laughed. "I don't think you two will mind if I call it a night. Zoran, can you give me a hand getting the trailer hooked up and getting Gloria loaded? Abby, I know you need to get your piece packed for transport. I'll send Zoran back down to help you when I'm done with him." Abby took the hint. Abby, stay. Zoran, go. Edna wanted him alone for a few minutes. Abby gave Edna a kiss and a hug, telling her she would see her later in the week when she went into town. Edna hugged Abby tightly. She had a feeling it might be the last time she saw her precious little girl. She fought back tears at the thought. She didn't know why she felt that way. She just did. Brushing Abby's hair back, Edna gave Abby one last kiss on her forehead before looking her deeply in the eyes. "You know I love you, baby girl. I'm glad you finally found the man to complete you. Be happy." Abby fought back tears. "I love you too, Edna." Abby stood by the door for a few minutes, watching as Edna and Zoran walked back up the path toward the cabin. Taking a deep breath, she turned and began the tedious task of packing her creation. Edna waited until they were far enough away from the workshop so Abby wouldn't hear what she had to say. She was determined for Abby to find happiness, even if it meant her moving far away. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she knew people. It had been her job for over 30 years in the entertainment business to know how to read people, and Zoran was like no person she had ever met. "Who are you?" Edna turned, looking at Zoran. "And don't try to bullshit me. I know people, and you are not like anyone I have ever met. I need to know you aren't going to hurt Abby. I'd kill you myself right now if I thought you would. I just need to know my baby girl is going to be happy." Zoran stood for a moment, looking at the old woman standing in front of him. Looking down at the determination in the woman's face, Zoran knew he could not hurt her or Abby by taking Abby away without the woman knowing Abby would be all right. Staring up at the path to the meadow, he made the decision to let Abby's friend know just how much Abby would be loved and cared for. Reaching down, he took Edna's withered hand in his and nodded. Edna was nervous as Zoran led her up the path to the meadow. She had been to the meadow hundreds, hell, maybe even thousands of times over the 30-plus years she had known Abby's grandparents. Bo ran ahead of them, used to the direction they were going now. Edna was beginning to grow concerned until she stepped into the meadow and saw a large golden ship appearing out of thin air. She trembled as Zoran led her inside. He waited patiently for his symbiot to accept her as a friend of Abby's. Turning to look at Edna, Zoran said softly, "I am Zoran Reykill, High King and leader of the Valdier." Edna's shaky hand went to her throat as she slowly sank down onto a seat that formed for her. "Oh dear, you really aren't like any man I've ever met before, are you?" Zoran smiled gently. "I highly doubt it." "How?" Edna began. "How did you meet Abby?" Zoran's lips curved into a soft smile. "She found me. I was captured by another species. I was injured and landed here looking for a safe place to heal. Bo actually found me. Abby took me into her home and cared for me and my ship," Zoran said, waving his hand to the golden ship they sat in. Edna looked around at the inside of the spaceship in awe. The walls sparkled and moved as if they were alive. She could see the colors swirling around them. The chair she was sitting on formed out of a type of liquid metal, fitting itself to her. She noticed that once the huge man in front of her sat down, additional panels of gold formed in front of the seat he was in. It looked almost like a monitor of a computer, only paper thin. Edna shook her head. It was more than her old mind could absorb all at once. "You're going to take her away, aren't you?" Edna whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "When you leave, you plan to take her." "Yes," Zoran said firmly. "She is my true mate. I have marked her as mine, and neither of us can be with another." "She doesn't know, does she?" Edna asked sadly. While her heart broke for her own loss, she couldn't help but be happy for Abby. "No, she thinks to stay here," Zoran said. "What if she doesn't want to go? Surely she has the right to know, to make the decision," Edna began. Her voice faded as Zoran shook his head. "We can't be apart. To do so would mean death for us both," Zoran said. "Edna, you need not worry. I will do everything in my power to make her happy. I love Abby very much. She is my other half." Edna smiled through her tears, nodding. "I believe you. She is very special. She deserves to be happy. Just keep her safe and love her. That's all I could ever ask." Zoran leaned forward and gently cupped Edna's cheek. "I will. I promise." Zoran watched as Edna drove slowly down the drive, Bo's head hanging out the window with the green tennis ball held tightly in his mouth. He turned and walked down the path to Abby's workshop. Tomorrow, 2 of his brothers would be here. Unknown to Abby, he would not be staying any longer than it took for her to return to him. Then, he would never let her go again.